Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're embarking on a really critical mission, actually. It's sort of custom built for you, our listener, an ME's student, crafting an audio overview for school and district leadership.
Yeah, you've got a big task ahead,
Yeah.
articulating the path forward for learning skills development in Ontario.
And it's a complex path, isn't it? The system's incredibly diverse. Leaders are caught between these, well, twin demands.
Exactly. On one hand, you've got the non-negotiable need for policy compliance, accountability,
Mm.
pretty rigid stuff.
And on the other, the absolute necessity for deep, adaptive, really human-centered change. It feels like a real tightrope walk.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And, the current moment in education demands a fundamental evolution in what we even mean by leadership.
So it's not enough just to be a good manager anymore.
Yes.
Supervising, handling logistics, making sure you're aligned with board directives.
Well, that management piece is crucial, don't get me wrong. It's part of the job description, right, under the Education Act. But transformative leadership today has to go way beyond that technical compliance.
It needs to tackle the messier stuff.
The really complex adaptive challenges, things like systemic inequity, entrenched racism, and this urgent need to build the skills, cognitive, social, emotional, that students actually need for the world they're entering.
That distinction you just made, managing technical problems versus leading adaptive change, that feels like the absolute heart of the challenge for our listener, for you.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because the traditional toolkit, relying mostly on standardized tests, rigid hierarchies, it's just not cutting it anymore.
Not for personalized learning, not for systemic equity.
Exactly. So our mission today in this deep dive is to try and synthesize three critical lenses. When you weave these together, they become, almost a prerequisite for modern leadership in Ontario.
Okay, what are these three lenses?
First, the structured accountability of the Ontario Leadership Framework, the OLF. We have to start there.
Okay, the structure.
Second, we blend that with the radical human-centered insights from street data. This is all about intentionally centering those marginalized voices.
Human-centered. Got it.
And finally, we filter everything through the, frankly, urgent ethical drive of anti-racist and equity strategies.
Structure, human insights, and ethical drive.
Okay. And if we tie this all together, the goal isn't just about following a checklist or, collecting data for data's sake.
No, it's deeper.
Much deeper.
Yeah.
We really want to pull out the profound ethical and equity imperative for integrating these things. Why adopting what's called a pedagogy of voice, POV, is just, it's the non-negotiable.
The pedagogy of voice.
Yeah, radically shifting power and agency to the student. That's the bedrock for any leader looking for sustainable, transformative change in Ontario's incredibly diverse schools today.
All right. Sounds like a crucial conversation. Let's jump in. So to start, every leader in Ontario, you're operating within a pretty clearly defined accountability structure. And that foundation is the Ontario Leadership Framework, the OLF. Why is understanding this framework, even though it was revised back in 2013, still so fundamental?
Well, the OLF isn't just some document gathering dust on a shelf. It's meant to be a compact, practical guide, grounded in research outlining what effective leadership looks like here.
Okay.
Its real strength, especially for system leaders like the ones you're addressing, is that it enforces a common leadership language.
A common language. Why is that so important?
Because that shared vocabulary is absolutely essential for high-quality professional learning. It makes sure professional dialogue is actually productive, not just people talking past each other. And it helps standardize how we recruit, develop, and appraise leaders at all levels.
So it creates coherence across the system.
Exactly. Systemic coherence. That's the goal.
And within that coherence, the OLF gets pretty specific about personalization and equity, doesn't it? There's that key component. Reaching every student. What demands are really packed into that phrase?
Reaching every student is basically the OLF's mandate for precision and personalization. It's telling leaders they have to move beyond just generalized one-size-fits-all instruction.
Okay, so what does it require specifically?
Three things, really. First, genuine personalization of the learning experience for each student. Second, a serious dedication to ongoing professional learning for staff. They need the tools. And third, critically, precision. Precision in diagnosis and instruction.
Precision. What does that look like in practice for a leader?
It means leaders have to actively oversee and coordinate the whole instructional program. They need to make sure the curriculum connects smoothly across different subjects and grade levels. Reinforce learning, avoid gaps, avoid needless repetition.
And how does that connect to assessment? Because as we'll get into, the data suggests relying on just one type of assessment is, well, it's failing a lot of students.
Yeah, the OLF is clear on this too. Leaders need to help staff really understand the purpose of assessment. Assessment for learning as learning and of learning, not just testing.
Right, the different types.
And crucially, the OLF insists on using multiple sources of evidence when you're analyzing how students are doing. You can't just rely on one test score.
So looking at different kinds of data points.
Absolutely. And system leaders, especially, have to prioritize identifying those students who need the most support, the ones currently being marginalized by the system.
Okay.
And for those leaders operating at the district or board level, the OLF points to systems thinking as a key cognitive resource. That's huge.
Systems thinking, let's pause on that for a second, because if you're a system leader trying to drive complex change, seeing how all the pieces fit together, policy, practice, resources, that ability seems vital.
It's absolutely critical. Systems thinking means leaders need to develop and implement improvement plans for the board, for schools, interactively, collaboratively.
Not just top-down directives.
No. It means aligning everything, organizational structures, how money is allocated, professional development, directly with those specific improvement goals. But, and this is key, it also has to allow for school-level variation. Meaning a leader has to recognize that what works in a high-needs urban school might not be the right fit for a small rural school, even if they share the same overall board goal.
So context matters.
Immensely.
Yeah.
That's where equity really starts recognizing the system needs to be flexible and respond to the local reality, not just impose uniformity.
And that need for flexibility, for responsiveness, it's actually embedded in Ontario's legal framework, especially around special education, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. The Education Act is very clear. Special education programs must be based on and modified by the results of continuous assessment and evaluation.
So that continuous assessment loop isn't just good practice, it's legally required. It defines the program.
Precisely. It's the structure itself. And that leads us straight to the policy definition of equity in Ontario, which often gets misunderstood.
How so?
Well, the policy defines equity as fair, inclusive, and respectful treatment of all people. Standard enough.
Yeah.
But then it explicitly pushes back against the idea of simple equality.
Okay.
It states that equity does not mean treating people the same without regard for individual differences. That's a really powerful, intentional distinction.
So it's not about giving everyone the exact same thing.
No. It forces leaders to ensure that resources, teaching methods, assessment practices, everything are actually responsive to need, not just uniformly handed out. It's about fairness, not sameness.
And this shift from just equality to active responsiveness, that's driven by the Learning for All policy, right? Which guides assessment and instruction. How does that policy help meet diverse needs?
Learning for All is really the practical how-to for applying those equity principles in the classroom. It relies heavily on two big interconnected approaches.
Which are?
Universal Design for Learning, UDL, and differentiated instruction, DI.
Okay, break those down quickly.
Sure. UDL is about the big picture planning, designing instruction flexibly from the very beginning to anticipate diverse needs, building in options, removing barriers proactively.
And DEI?
DI is the responsive part. It's the real-time tailoring of instruction based on where specific students are, their readiness, their interest, their learning profiles.
So UDL is the plan, DI is the responsive action.
Kind of. A truly equity-focused leader make sure their staff aren't just, aware of these terms, but are rigorously using both UDL and DI in their day-to-day planning and teaching.
And to get really precise, to move from theory to action, educators have specific tools outlined in policy. The class profile seems like a key example of mandatory precision.
Oh, absolutely essential. The class profile is where you gather that holistic picture of the whole class. Strengths, needs, readiness levels, interests, even socio-affective stuff.
How does that help a system leader?
For a system leader, looking at trends across multiple class profiles is incredibly revealing. It's not just about individual student grades. It can highlight systemic gaps.
Like what?
Like, are a large number of students entering grade 9 consistently weak in organizational skills? That points to a systemic issue, maybe a need for explicit instruction in executive functions earlier on, not just trying to remediate individual kids later.
So it shifts the focus from fixing the child
To fixing the system.
Yeah. And then for students who need more targeted support, the individual student profile flows out of that class profile, right? Leading to the IEP.
Yes, the individual student profile provides that deep dive needed to develop the individual education plan, IEP.
And the IEP process itself is a major accountability piece.
Arguably the ultimate exercise in accountability and precision within the system. It's legally governed, requires informed parental consent for assessments, mandates transition plans.
Right, transition plans for almost all students by age 14.
Yeah, and the IEP itself has to be completed within 30 school days of a student being placed in a spec ed program. That whole process, identification, development, review, demands serious administrative rigor and clinical precision from system leaders. They have to ensure those legal deadlines and quality standards are met consistently,
Yeah.
everywhere.
Okay, listening to all that, the OLF, the equity policy, UDL, DI, class profiles, IEPs, it sounds like a really accountable, precise system on paper.
It does, doesn't it?
But here's the elephant in the room. The massive data contradiction that seems to expose a failure point in just relying on compliance. We have system data, right? Showing over 90% of students passing the standardized provincial test, the EQAO results. We can call that satellite data.
Yep, looks great from orbit.
High pass rates. Yeah. When we drill down, when we look at the internal classroom assessments, the day-to-day work, the teacher evaluations based on curriculum expectations, what we're calling classroom data.
The picture changes dramatically. We find only about 53% of those same students are achieving at high levels, meaning levels 3 or 4, in core skills like literacy.
A 40-point gap between passing a standardized test and demonstrating mastery in the classroom.
That gap, that's the million-dollar question for system leaders. It absolutely forces us to ask, what exactly are our different data sources measuring, and why the huge difference?
How do you, as someone advising system leaders, suggest they approach a principal who brings them those numbers? It feels like they point to two very different benchmarks being used.
It really does. The provincial test, that satellite data, seems to be measuring a basic threshold of competence. It serves a purpose, fulfills a political and public accountability function, maybe.
This sets a minimum bar.
Right. A low bar, arguably. Incentivizing just getting students over that line.
Whereas the internal classroom data,
If it's designed well, based on the curriculum expectations,
Yeah.
it should be measuring something closer to mastery. Higher level thinking, sophisticated skills, complex application.
so the discrepancy suggests what?
It strongly suggests we might have a system that's become very good at achieving technical compliance, getting kids to pass the test, but is potentially failing, maybe even miserably, at fostering genuine mastery and the adaptive competencies students actually need.
What are the systemic pressures or reasons behind this gap? It can't just be individual teachers grading differently, can it?
No, it's deeper than that. There are definitely systemic roots. First, there's often immense pressure for superficial achievement. Political pressure, administrative pressure to show high EQAO scores, high satellite data.
Keep the numbers looking good.
Right. Second, there's frequently a lack of consistent, system-wide professional development in assessment literacy. Teachers might struggle to design truly high-quality, authentic assessments that consistently capture what levels 3 and 4 actually look like.
Okay.
And third, there's the fear factor, the fear of accurately reporting low grades.
Fear.
Yeah. A teacher or a principal who reports that only 53% of their students are truly meeting mastery standards might feel vulnerable, scrutinized, blamed, which can unfortunately lead to grade inflation or subconsciously lowering classroom expectations just to avoid conflict or negative attention.
So the leader's role here is?
The leader's job is crucial to create a culture of psychological safety, a culture where accurate, honest classroom data isn't seen as failure, but as essential diagnostic information we need to improve teaching and learning.
Okay, so the OLF and the policy requirements give us the structure, the map. But this data contradiction clearly shows the map is incomplete. It's signaling that leadership needs to look beyond those easily measured numbers.
Exactly. We need to find the real human story behind the data.
And that need, that imperative to look deeper, is the perfect pivot point into our next segment. The ethical imperative of humanizing data through street data. So that really stark data contradiction we just discussed, that huge gap between the technical compliance suggested by satellite data and the often much lower rates of mastery seen in classroom data that serves as our jumping off point here.
Right. The OLF demands precision, it demands personalization. But to actually achieve that in a meaningful way, we have to move beyond just the quantitative, often generalized, often lagging satellite data.
We need something more immediate, more contextual.
Exactly. We need to embrace the qualitative, the contextualized, the deeply human-centered research approach known as street data.
Street data. Now, this isn't just about collecting a few anecdotes here and there, is it?
No, it's much more rigorous and, frankly, more radical than that. Street data is framed as a decolonizing form of knowledge.
Decolonizing. How so?
Because it intentionally pushes back against the historical, Western-centric overemphasis on purely empirical, quantifiable, scientific data, the kind of data that is often ignored, excluded, or outright invalidated the knowledge and experiences of marginalized groups.
So it values other ways of knowing.
Yes, it actively elevates non-Western ways of knowing. The indigenous oral traditions, Afrocentric perspectives, the rich lived experiences of students and families themselves. It honors knowledge that comes through narrative, through relationship, through community wisdom.
So if satellite data tells us what happened, the test score, the attendance rate street data helps us understand the why and maybe even how it feels to be in the system.
Precisely. It emerges directly from human interaction. It requires leaders and educators to get down to the ground level, to intentionally seek out and listen to the voices that are least heard, the students and families most marginalized by the status quo.
It sounds like the complete opposite of what's sometimes called the pedagogy of compliance.
It really is. Street data forces leaders to listen deeply to the symptoms of suffering within the system. Why is that student always late? Why are Black students disproportionately suspended? Satellite data just gives you the number: tardiness, suspension rate.
But street data gets at the cause.
Street data, gathered through genuine conversation, through empathy, might uncover things like systemic racism experienced in the classroom, hidden bullying, family crises, transportation issues, food insecurity. Things the numbers alone will never tell you.
And that's essential for equity, right? Diagnosing the root cause, not just reacting to the symptom.
Exactly. You can't fix a problem if you don't truly understand it from the perspective of those most affected.
Now, making this shift from a purely compliance-driven mindset to one focused on humanization and root causes, that sounds incredibly difficult for leaders trained in traditional ways. It needs a framework.
It does. It's adaptive work, not technical work. The source material proposes the Equity Transformation Cycle, ETC, as a guide. It's explicitly nonlinear, built around 4 core values or mindsets.
Nonlinear is important, meaning it's not a simple checklist.
Not at all. It acknowledges that this kind of change is messy, it's complex, it often involves setbacks. You cycle through these mindsets constantly, reflecting, adjusting, learning as you go.
Okay, let's walk through the 4 mindsets. What's the first one?
The first, and arguably the foundation for everything else, is listen. Mindset of radical inclusion.
Radical inclusion. Equity transformation always starts with listening. How does a leader ensure they're doing this radically? It's easy to say, I listen.
Radical inclusion means going beyond just hearing. It means deep listening, using your whole self, physically, emotionally, cognitively, even spiritually. And crucially, it means prioritizing the voices that the existing power structures tend to silence or ignore.
So intentionally seeking out the students, parents, community members who aren't usually at the table?
Yes. It's about building relational trust, creating spaces where people feel safe enough to share their truths, their pain, their experiences of marginalization. For leaders, this means being fully present, suspending judgment, holding space for discomfort, theirs and others.
It's not just listening to the loudest voice or the most senior person in the room.
Absolutely not. If a leader only listens to the usual suspects, they're just reinforcing the existing inequities. This kind of deep, intentional listening is actually political work. It challenges the status quo.
I imagine this listening phase must be really challenging for leaders personally. How do you guard against your own biases, your own defensiveness, especially when you might be hearing criticism of your school or your leadership?
That's where profound mindful listening and self-awareness come in. It's critical. When a leader hears feedback suggesting their school's culture or policies are causing harm, maybe perpetuating racial inequity, the natural human reaction is often defensiveness, maybe fragility.
Right, wanting to explain or justify.
Exactly. A leader committed to equity has to train themselves to notice that defensiveness rising, to pause, and to consciously set aside their own unchecked biases or limited cultural perspectives. They have to remember, the conversation isn't primarily about their personal intentions. It's about the impact of the system on others.
That takes practice. A lot of practice.
And humility. Okay, so once that deep, intentional listening has happened, the cycle moves to the next mindset. Uncover. Mindset of curiosity.
Uncover. So this is the diagnostic phase.
Yes, This is where you take the rich street data you've gathered and you work collaboratively, ideally, with diverse teams, including staff, students, parents, community members, to probe beneath the surface.
To find the root causes.
To find the root causes of the equity challenge you identify through listening. You're moving beyond the obvious symptoms. So if the street data reveals that Indigenous students feel invisible in the curriculum,
The question isn't just how do we add more Indigenous content?
right, the deeper question, driven by curiosity, is why do they feel invisible? What are the underlying assumptions in our curriculum design? What messages are being sent implicitly or explicitly? Are there biases in the resources we use? Is there a lack of teacher training or comfort?
It requires slowing down, resisting the quick fix.
Absolutely. Resisting the urge to jump to solutions before you truly understand the problem. And in this phase, the qualitative street data, the stories, the experiences has to be front and center in the conversation. It guides the inquiry.
Okay, listen, then uncover. What's next?
Next comes reimagine, mindset of creativity.
Reimagine. So we've listened deeply, we've uncovered root causes, now we need to envision something different.
Exactly. And reimagine here isn't just about brainstorming nice ideas. In the context of equity transformation, it specifically involves confronting and actively disrupting patterns of white supremacy culture, particularly things like power hoarding.
Power hoarding, meaning the tendency for decisions to be made by a small group at the top.
Yes. So creativity in this cycle demands power sharing. Leaders must constantly work to expand who gets to make decisions. Bring students, parents, community elders, educational assistants, custodians' voices, typically excluded from strategic planning, to the table as genuine partners.
That sounds potentially threatening to traditional leadership structures. The OLF emphasizes the leader's role in ensuring coherence and direction. Handing over power seems counterintuitive to that.
It is a massive challenge to the traditional model. Think about something like Youth Participatory Action Research, YPR, that deliberately empowers marginalized youth to research issues affecting them and propose solutions.
So the leader's role shifts.
Dramatically.
Yeah.
The leader shifts from being the sole decider to being a facilitator, a resource allocator, someone who champions the community-generated solutions and works to remove barriers so they can be implemented. It requires letting go of control.
That takes courage, which leads us, I assume, to the final mindset.
It does. The final stage is move, mindset of courage.
It's taking action.
Yes. But it's not just any action. It's about taking tangible, specific, anti-racist, equity-driven action based on what was learned and reimagined.
And acknowledging it might not be perfect.
Absolutely. The cycle recognizes that action in complex systems is inherently messy. There will be imperfections. There will likely be resistance, maybe political pushback, maybe internal friction. There will be mistakes.
So the courage isn't in having all the answers.
No. The courage lies in the persistence, in the commitment to act anyway, to learn from the mistakes, to reflect deeply, and to adjust the course, constantly cycling back through listening, uncovering, reimagining, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard.
It's about staying the course for equity even when things get uncomfortable.
Exactly. A leader using this cycle, often described as a warm demander, uses their resolve and moral clarity here. They refuse to let the vital work of equity get pushed aside or siloed or treated like just another temporary initiative. It requires sustained courage.
Let's circle back for a moment to the mechanics of collecting street data. You talked about deep listening. The source material highlights something striking about the power of empathy and intuition, specifically around nonverbal communication.
Yes, the research on this is pretty compelling and consistent. It suggests that in conversations where emotion is involved, which is almost always the case when discussing experiences of inequity or marginalization, the actual words spoken convey a surprisingly small percentage of the meaning.
How small?
Some studies suggest words account for only about 7% of the meaning conveyed.
Only 7%. So where does the rest come from?
The other 93% comes through nonverbal channels, about 55% through body language, posture, gestures, facial expressions, and about 38% through tone of voice, pitch, volume, cadence.
Wow. 93% nonverbal. That's a huge wake-up call for any leader, especially now with so many interactions happening virtually. If you're trying to gather sensitive, qualitative street data, you have to be attuned to much more than just the words.
You absolutely do. You need to be fully present, physically and emotionally, to pick up on those subtle cues. This is why techniques like empathy interviews are considered a cornerstone of gathering good street data.
Empathy interviews. What's the goal there?
They're specifically designed not just to get information, but to access and understand a person's feelings, their underlying perception, their lived experience related to whatever systemic challenge you're exploring.
And the leader's role during such an interview.
The leader, or interviewer, must practice intense self-awareness, monitoring their own body language, their own tone. Are they leaning in, making eye contact? Or are they checking their watch, looking distracted, maybe signaling judgment or impatience non-verbally?
Because if the leader's tone subtly conveys skepticism or disbelief,
The speaker will likely shut down. That relational trust evaporates, and potentially 93% of the real meaning, the deep street data, is lost. The absolute focus has to be on honoring the speaker's emotional reality and building that safe connection.
okay, so all this incredibly hard work, the radical inclusion, the deep listening, the uncovering, the reimagining, the courageous action, the empathy, it's all in service of creating a different kind of learning environment, which brings us to the ultimate goal, the pedagogy of voice. POVI. Why is POVI described as a non-negotiable pedagogical reorientation? That sounds pretty strong.
It is strong, and intentionally so, because POVI represents a fundamental shift in the power dynamics of the classroom and the school.
Yeah.
It's a move away from the old industrial model teacher as the expert pouring knowledge into passive student vessels.
The sage on the stage model.
Right. POVI flips that. It shifts the locus of learning, the center of gravity, to the student's voice, their experiences, their questions, their agency. It allows them to shape the learning, the assessment, the entire experience in meaningful ways.
So it goes beyond just academic metrics or compliance.
Far beyond. The goal of POVI is to foster healing, especially for students marginalized by traditional schooling, deep cognitive growth, and a genuine sense of agency. It's about developing whole human beings, not just compliant test takers.
And POVI itself is built on 3 core pillars, right? 3 interconnected components leaders need to understand.
Yes, identity, belonging, and efficacy.
Okay, let's touch on each.
Identity. Identity means the student feels their unique ways of being, knowing, and learning. Their cultural background, their personal history, their funds of knowledge are not just acknowledged, but are actively valued and integrated into the curriculum and the life of the classroom. They see themselves reflected.
Makes sense. Second, belonging.
Belonging is that feeling of being seen, respected, cared for, even loved within the learning community. It means feeling safe physically, emotionally, intellectually, free from harm, microaggressions, or the fear of judgment. It's knowing you are an essential member of the group.
And third, efficacy.
Efficacy is the outcome of having your identity affirmed and feeling like you belong. It's that internal sense of power, the belief that your voice matters, that you can influence your own learning, solve problems, and make a positive difference in your community and the world. It's the antidote to feeling powerless or voiceless.
Identity, belonging, efficacy. When a student has all 3,
They transform. They move from being what the sources call a dependent learner, just focused on filling requirements, fixing errors, complying with the teacher, to becoming an active intellectual, a critical thinker, a creative problem solver, an agent of their own learning.
the source material actually gives some very concrete, simple rules for educators trying to put POVI into practice. And these rules seem designed to directly challenge traditional classroom structures.
They really do.
Yeah.
They force a confrontation with the way things have always been done. Things like talk less, smile more.
Meaning the teacher yields the floor.
Exactly. Cede instructional dominance. Another is questions over answers.
Shift the responsibility for inquiry to the student.
Right. Also, ritualize reflection and revision, valuing the learning process over just the final product. Make learning public, creating authentic audiences beyond just the teacher. And circle up.
Circle up.
Yeah, literally arranging the space, often in circles, to create a non-hierarchical, more democratic, community-based learning structure. Breaking down the front-facing model.
These all push against the grain. But the final rule seems the most disruptive, especially for a system so focused on accountability metrics. Feedback over grades.
Ah, yes. That one hits right at the heart of the conventional system, doesn't it? It's a direct challenge to what we might call the transactional, grade-driven model of schooling.
The sort of econometric rating system trying to boil complex learning down to a single number or letter.
Exactly. Street data and the whole philosophy of POVI tells us that the primary engine of learning isn't the grade. It's timely, specific, actionable feedback. Feedback that students can actually use to understand where they are, where they need to go, and how to get there.
So the focus shifts from judging to developing.
Precisely. When grades become the be-all and end-all, they often shut down learning. They reduce the student's own critical judgment. They encourage playing it safe. They reinforce compliance over intellectual risk-taking.
So if a leader truly wants to foster mastery, agency, identity, belonging, efficacy,
They have to be willing and find the courage to shift the culture, to champion rich, descriptive, formative feedback as the primary currency of learning, and to de-emphasize or even radically rethink the role of traditional grades. That's a massive political and cultural lift. It requires significant leadership courage to even attempt, let alone sustain.
Okay, so we've laid out the necessary structure with the OLF. We've explored the ethical process driven by street data and the equity transformation cycle, and we've identified the ultimate goal, creating a pedagogy of voice.
Structure, process, and purpose.
Right. But now we need the how. What's the engine that actually drives this kind of deep adaptive change within a school or a district, the mechanism leaders use?
That mechanism is collaborative inquiry. CI. CI provides the practical, ongoing structure for teams to move from just talking about change or complying with mandates to actually transforming practice.
So CI isn't just another committee meeting that produces a report.
Definitely not, if it's done well.
Hmm.
True CI is professional learning that's deeply embedded in praxis.
Praxis.
Yeah, that cyclical integration of constant critical reflection with intentional informed action. It's learning by doing, reflecting on the doing, and then adjusting the doing based on that reflection.
How does it work in practice?
Typically, a CI team, teachers, maybe administrators, support staff, comes together around a specific, persistent student learning challenge that they've likely identified through their street data work. They formulate an inquiry question.
Okay.
Then they collaboratively collect various kinds of evidence, remember triangulation. They analyze that evidence to get at root causes. They research and plan a change in practice or an intervention. They implement it. They collect more evidence to see the impact, and then they reflect, adjust, and refine. It's a continuous loop.
It sounds rigorous, but you mentioned earlier that confronting our own practice is incredibly hard. You talked about the incongruence between espoused theories and theories in use. That feels like the trickiest part of CI for a leader to navigate.
It absolutely is the hardest part. It's profound, often uncomfortable, organizational labor. That incongruence is the gap between what we say we believe are espoused theory.
Like, we believe all students can learn at high levels.
Right. That's what we say, what's maybe written in the school improvement plan.
Hmm.
But then our theory in use, what we actually do, revealed perhaps through classroom observations or analyzing student work patterns, might show that in reality, we only provide challenging tasks to the top 20% of students, or we grade certain groups of students more harshly.
Uncovering that gap must challenge deeply held assumptions.
Deeply held, often unconscious assumptions. And it bumps up against what are called organizational defense routines.
Defense routines, what are those?
They're the things we do, often without realizing it, to protect ourselves or the group from potential embarrassment, threat, or discomfort. Like subtly blaming students or families for poor results instead of examining our own teaching practices. Or avoiding difficult conversations about race by saying, we don't see color.
So when CI starts pushing teams to look honestly at their own practices and the impact of those practices,
It can feel very threatening. People naturally resist. They get defensive. That's where the leader's role is critical. They need the facilitation skills, the political fortitude, the sheer persistence to stay the course.
to manage the discomfort and keep the inquiry focused on the evidence, not on blame.
Exactly. And to model vulnerability themselves. CI has to be structured in a way that anticipates and works through that defensiveness, not shuts down because of it.
And a key part of keeping it rigorous and validating the street data insights is how evidence is collected. You mentioned triangulation earlier. Leaders need to ensure teams aren't just relying on easy-to-get numbers, like test scores.
Yes. Triangulation is non-negotiable for robust CI. It means deliberately collecting and comparing evidence from at least 3 different vantage points, typically observation, conversation, and student products.
Okay, let's use an example. Say a CI team is inquiring into how can we improve students' ability to construct evidence-based arguments in grade 10 history? How would they triangulate?
All right. Observation might involve peer observations or administrators visiting classrooms, specifically looking for how argument skills are being taught and practiced. Are students engaged in structured debate? Are they getting feedback on their reasoning?
Okay, observation, then conversation.
Conversation would involve talking directly to students, maybe through focus groups or empathy interviews, asking them, How confident do you feel building an argument? What parts are hardest? Do you feel the feedback you get helps? You're getting their perspective, their experience.
And finally, student products.
Right. This is looking at the actual work students produce, essays, presentations, debate notes, maybe even graphic organizers. Analyzing these artifacts, probably using a shared rubric focused on argumentation skills, to see if the quality is actually changing over time as the team implements new strategies.
So by comparing the data from observations, conversations, and student work. Yeah.
You get a much richer, more reliable, more nuanced picture of what's really happening and whether the changes being made are actually effective. It protects against drawing conclusions based on just one potentially misleading data point.
Now, as leaders are guiding this complex, often uncomfortable CI work focused on equity, the source material warns about subtle forms of resistance, things called equity traps, things that look good on the surface but actually undermine real change.
Yes, these traps are insidious because they often feel like progress, but they keep the system stuck. A common one is the trap of doing equity.
Doing equity.
This is when equity work gets reduced to a series of superficial, performative tasks. Buying the diverse posters, holding the one-off multicultural fair, implementing a new reporting checklist. It treats equity like a technical problem to be managed through activities, rather than a deep, adaptive challenge requiring fundamental shifts in culture, mindset, and power.
So it lets people check the box without confronting the root causes identified through street data.
Precisely. It avoids the messy, difficult work of examining beliefs, biases, and systemic barriers.
Another trap mentioned is siloing equity. How does that play out?
This is also very common. Siloing equity means locating all the responsibility for this work in one place. Maybe one specific policy document, one dedicated committee, the equity committee, or even one person, like an equity officer or a dean of culture.
Why is that a trap? Doesn't it show commitment to have a dedicated person or team?
It can look like commitment, but it fundamentally fails to grasp the systemic nature of inequity, especially racism. True equity transformation requires everyone in the system to see it as their work. It needs to be woven into curriculum teams, budget decisions, hiring practices, school climate initiatives everywhere.
Not just the job of the equity committee.
Right. If it's siloed, everyone else can implicitly think, oh, they're handling the equity stuff. And they don't feel the need to examine their own practice or area of responsibility through an equity lens. The CI process and the ETC framework we discussed are designed specifically to counteract this siloing by making the work collaborative, ongoing, and central to everyone's role.
Okay, so this deep adaptive work, driven by CI, focused on POV, is happening. But now, it's intersecting dramatically with rapid advancements in technology. Let's shift to that second major theme for leaders, integrating AI and technology for learning skills development.
Yes, technology and AI specifically is becoming increasingly unavoidable in education. And the first thing to say is that technology, used thoughtfully, can be a powerful equity tool.
How so?
Well, think about assistive technologies, AT, first. These are often legally mandated and are absolutely fundamental for inclusion. They help reduce or eliminate barriers for students with disabilities, SWDs. Text-to-speech for students with reading difficulties, speech-to-text for students with writing challenges, graphic organizers for students with executive function issues. For students with specific challenges like developmental language disorder, DLD, or speech sound disorders, SSDs, AT can be transformative.
It allows them to access the curriculum and demonstrate their knowledge despite their disability.
Exactly. It ensures their disability doesn't automatically prevent them from engaging with complex ideas or showing what they know and can do. That's a baseline equity function.
Okay, beyond basic AT, how are the newer AI-driven tools fitting into the OLF's mandate for precision and personalization?
AI is being baked into many systems already. Lots of learning management systems like Schoology or IXL use algorithms to track student progress and suggest customized content or practice exercises.
Adapting based on performance.
Right. And then you have more sophisticated adaptive learning platforms, things like ELICEX in math or Freckle for literacy in math that use AI more dynamically. They constantly monitor student interactions, diagnose very specific skill gaps in real time, and then recommend personalized instructional pathways or next steps.
So they act almost like individual tutors adjusting on the fly.
In a sense, yes. Highly specialized, tireless digital teaching assistants. Used well, it can definitely help teachers achieve that level of diagnostic precision and personalization that the OLF calls for, especially in diverse classrooms.
Let's get specific about developing core academic skills like rating. The National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, in the US, for example, outlines key criteria for good writing. Can AI help students develop those skills?
Yes, the NAE key criteria are useful benchmarks: organization of ideas, development of ideas, and language facility conventions. And AI tools are emerging that can support students, particularly struggling writers, across all three areas, often acting as scaffolds.
Okay, take organization of ideas, the planning, the structure, the flow. How can AI help there?
There are AI outlining tools, like TextBuddy AI or a ref's outline generator, that can help students brainstorm, structure their thoughts logically, sequence their points, and even identify potential gaps or weaknesses in their planned argument before they start writing.
That could be huge for students who struggle with executive function or just getting started.
Absolutely. It provides structure and lowers that initial hurdle.
What about development of ideas, the actual content, the elaboration, the evidence?
Here, tools like Quillbot, or even some features within larger AI writing assistants, can prompt students to elaborate. They might suggest adding specific examples, using stronger evidence, defining key terms, or considering counter-arguments. They can help students flesh out their ideas.
With the caveat that the student still needs to do the thinking, right?
Crucially, the AI can prompt, but the student has to generate the substance. Used carefully, though, it can provide scaffolding for students who know what they want to say, but struggle with the academic language or structure to say it effectively.
And the third area, language facility and conventions. Grammar, spelling, sentence structure, word choice. This seems like AI's sweet spot right now.
It definitely is. Tools like Grammarly, Ginger, even newer ones like EditGPT, are very effective at automating the checking of conventions. They act like sophisticated proofreaders, catching errors in grammar, punctuation, spelling, and even offering suggestions for improving sentence fluency or word choice.
How does that help the teacher?
It can be transformative for teacher workload and focus. By automating much of the basic error correction, it frees up the teacher's time and energy during feedback to focus on the much more important, higher-level aspects of writing: the quality of the ideas, the strength of the argument, the critical analysis, the development of the student's unique voice.
Which connects back to pedagogy of voice.
Exactly. Less focus on surface errors, more focus on meaning and impact.
Okay, but introducing all this powerful technology, especially AI, brings a huge new responsibility for leaders, doesn't it? Something non-technical. The need for AI literacy.
Oh, absolutely critical and urgent. Leaders cannot just deploy these tools and assume everyone's staff and students knows how to use them effectively, ethically, and safely. AI literacy needs to be explicitly taught, integrated into curriculum, and probably even assessed.
What does AI literacy entail?
It's generally defined as having the knowledge and skills to understand what AI is and isn't, how it works at a conceptual level, how to use specific AI tools effectively for learning, and, crucially, how to critically evaluate AI outputs and the ethical implications of AI systems.
So leaders need to mandate professional learning around this, not just how to click the buttons.
No, much deeper. It has to include critical assessment of the tools themselves, their potential biases, their impact on learning, and the ethical considerations, especially around data.
Let's talk about that critical evaluation. What principles should guide leaders and teachers when choosing and using AI tools, particularly regarding student data?
The guiding principles have to be centered on ethics and equity. Before adopting any tool, leaders and teachers must ask hard questions, prioritizing things like data privacy. Where is student data stored? Who owns it? Is it secure? How is it being used? Is it being sold or used for training algorithms in ways we don't know about?
Okay, privacy. What else?
Use. How exactly does the algorithm work? How does it make decisions about learning pathways or feedback? Is it transparent or a black box? Does it potentially reinforce existing biases? Accessibility. Is the tool accessible to all students, including those using assistive technologies? Does it meet accessibility standards? And purpose. What is the actual pedagogical purpose? Does it enhance learning in ways that align with our values, like POV, or does it just automate tasks or promote passive consumption?
So, prioritizing fairness, trustworthiness, transparency, safety.
Over just the shiny new features or promises of efficiency.
And this connects directly back to legal obligations in Ontario, doesn't it? Things like MFIPA, the privacy legislation.
Absolutely. Leaders have a legal duty of care regarding the collection, use, disclosure, and storage of student personal information. When using third-party AI vendors, especially those based outside Canada, leaders must be incredibly vigilant. Contracts need rigorous review regarding data sovereignty and privacy protections.
And consent.
Consent is paramount. The same principles of informed parental consent that apply to traditional assessments or special education services under the Education Act must be rigorously applied to any AI tool that collects or analyzes sensitive student data for assessment or personalized learning. Parents and students need to understand what data is being collected and why. The technology must serve the student's best interests, ethically and legally.
So we've got the policy, the structure, OLF. We've got the humanizing process, street data, CI. We've integrated the technology, AIAT. But after all that, we're still left with the most crucial and perhaps hardest part, applying human judgment and ethical oversight. How does a leader ensure that human element isn't lost amidst the data and the algorithms?
That's the core challenge of modern leadership, isn't it? Technology, including AI, is only a tool, a potentially powerful one, but still just a tool. It is not a solution in itself. It can't replace human connection, empathy, ethical reasoning, or pedagogical judgment.
So the leader needs a way to keep that human judgment front and center.
Yes. And the concept of the warm demander leader that came up in the street data discussion is highly relevant here.
Remind us, what defines a warm demander leader in this context of equity, transformation, and now technology?
A warm demander leader combines high expectations with genuine care and belief in others. They expect competence, growth, and commitment to equity from their staff, but they also actively build relationships and convey their unwavering belief that their colleagues can meet those expectations.
How do they operate?
They use street-level data, they engage in adaptive coaching, they facilitate difficult conversations, they build relational trust. They don't shy away from challenging practices that perpetuate inequity, but they do so with empathy and support.
The idea was calling folks in and up to the work of equity, rather than just calling them out.
Exactly. It's about
Okay.
building capacity and collective efficacy. They affirm the difficulty of the work, validate people's experiences, especially those feeling vulnerable, but they hold firm to the moral purpose. This kind of leadership, driven by moral clarity, empathy, radical inclusion, is what provides the necessary human oversight for technology. AI can help manage the technical problems, maybe analyze large data sets, but only the human leader, guided by ethics and street data, can navigate the complex, adaptive challenges of equity and truly foster a pedagogy of voice. The tech serves the human, never the other way around. #Chag outro.
So we started this deep dive acknowledging the complexity you face as an MED student tasked with outlining transformative leadership for learning skills in Ontario. We saw that stark gap, that 40-point contradiction between technical compliance and genuine student mastery.
Yeah, a gap that signals the limits of just following the old playbook.
And our synthesis today suggests that real transformation happens when you intentionally weave together that necessary structure with deep humanity.
Exactly. The Ontario Leadership Framework, OLF, gives you the essential structure, the accountability benchmarks, that common language the system needs. It's the foundation.
But it's not enough on its own.
No. Then you need street data and the equity transformation cycle, ETC. That provides the adaptive process, the way to inquire, to humanize the data, to relentlessly diagnose the root causes of inequity by listening, really listening, to the voices at the margins.
Structure, process, and the purpose.
And the pedagogy of voice, Sofeli, delivers that essential purpose. It's about liberating student agency. It's about confronting systemic inequities head-on by intentionally fostering identity, belonging, and efficacy for every single student. That's the why.
It's clear that this kind of transformative leadership is incredibly demanding work. It's not a simple technical fix you can just delegate or automate with a new piece of software.
No, it's fundamentally adaptive work. It requires persistence, real courage to look at uncomfortable data and incongruent practices, and the humility and willingness to share power to radically expand who gets to be at the decision-making table.
And while AI tools can be powerful assistants in this work,
they must never replace the leader's ethical judgment, never replace empathy, never replace that commitment to radical inclusion and human connection. That human oversight is paramount.
So building on that, there's a core shift in mindset here, isn't there? The source material argues pretty strongly that challenging behavior or academic struggles should be viewed primarily as a deficit of skill, not a lack of will.
Yes, a crucial reframing. It implies the solution isn't punishment or blame, but collaboration, explicit skill building, problem solving, and flexibility from the adults in the system.
Which leads us to a final provocative thought for you, our listener, to take away and reflect on. If your ultimate goal as a leader or someone influencing leaders is genuinely to foster mastery, belonging, identity, and efficacy, the heart of POV, then what one immediate concrete action will you commit to taking in the next week?
One action to deliberately prioritize gathering that qualitative human data, that street data. Maybe it's scheduling just 2 or 3 genuine empathy interviews with students or families whose voices aren't often heard. An action that puts the human story ahead of the easily quantifiable metrics for a moment.
An action ensuring that technology, including AI, remains a tool in service of the student's voice and agency, rather than subtly controlling or silencing it.
What's that one action?
Think on that. Let that question guide your next steps in your leadership praxis. We really hope this deep dive has given you a solid foundation, blending structure, process, and purpose, along with the ethical imperative you need to drive your important project forward.